When this man is asked to find a Coke with a yellow cap, he has no idea why it's important. What he discovers is simply astonishing. John pulled into the supermarket parking lot, his friend Mark's voice still ringing in his ears. "Don't forget, I really need that Coke with the yellow cap. It's important, John." At first, John thought it was just one of Mark's odd preferences. Mark was always specific about certain things. He would often joke that he had a knack for spotting details that most people missed. But this time, something in his tone had been different, urgent even. John couldn't shake it. He grabbed a cart and headed inside, weaving through the aisles until he reached the soda section. Just grab the yellow cap, he reminded himself. How hard could that be? But the shelves were packed with seas of red-capped Coke bottles that seemed to stretch endlessly. John scanned the area, but there was no yellow in sight. His brow furrowed as he stepped closer, pushing bottles aside and looking deeper. Mark hadn't explained why he needed it, but John figured it couldn't be just any Coke. It had to be that one. Just as he was about to give up, something caught his eye. There, at the very back of the shelf, was one lone, yellow-capped bottle. A wave of relief washed over him as he reached for it. But just as his fingers closed around the bottle, another hand grabbed it from the other side. John froze for a moment, then turned to see a woman standing beside him, her grip tight on the same bottle. She glanced at him, her expression neutral but unyielding. "Sorry," she said, her voice firm. "I've been looking for this." John paused. He wasn't expecting this. "Yeah, same here," he replied, still holding the bottle. "It's for my friend Mark. He, really wants this specific one." The woman glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's the only one left. I've been to 3 stores already," she said, her voice low but tense. "I promised someone too." John stood his ground, unsure of what to do. Mark had been so specific about this bottle, and he didn't want to let him down. But it was clear the woman had her reasons too. The air between them thickened as neither let go. "You know what?" John said finally, loosening his grip. "You take it, but can you at least tell me why this one's so important?" The woman blinked, surprised by his question. "It's the yellow cap," she said slowly, as if it were obvious. "It's different." She hesitated, then added, "You might want to ask your friend why." Without another word, she pulled the bottle into her cart and walked away, leaving John standing there, curiosity gnawing at him. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message to Mark. "Why is this yellow cap so important?" John stared at his phone, waiting for Mark's reply. Seconds ticked by, but nothing came through. Curiosity and frustration bubbled up inside him. What's the big deal with this yellow cap? He was about to pocket his phone when it buzzed. Mark's message popped up. "Any luck?" John quickly typed back, "No, someone beat me to it. What's going on with these yellow cap bottles?" A minute passed, then another, before Mark finally replied, "It's a long story. Just try to find one, okay? I'll owe you big time." John wasn't the type to walk away from a mystery. He'd always been inquisitive, whether it was dissecting mechanical watches or diving deep into historical documentaries. So Mark's cryptic answers, as well as the strange behavior that the woman exhibited, definitely made him intrigued. "All right," John muttered under his breath, pushing his cart toward the customer service desk. He approached the clerk. "Hey, do you happen to have more of those Cokes with the yellow caps? I need one and the shelf's empty." The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, gave him a puzzled look. "Yellow caps?" he asked. "We don't get many of those. I actually don't even know why they have yellow caps. I'm new here. I just noticed that they go quickly. I think we're out. Check the next store." As he was about to leave, he glanced across the parking lot and spotted something that made him pause. It was the woman from the store, loading her own groceries into the back of her car. She carefully placed the yellow-capped Coke bottle on the seat beside her as if it were something precious. John debated for a second. Should he approach her? Maybe ask for more information? But before he could make up his mind, she got into her car and drove off, leaving John with more questions than answers. He sat in his car for a moment, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. This is getting ridiculous, he thought, but he couldn't deny his curiosity. The yellow cap clearly mattered to many people, and now John needed to know why. He pulled up his phone and opened the map, searching for another grocery store nearby. One more stop, he decided. I'll find out what this is all about. The second supermarket was only a short drive away. John moved quickly through the aisles, his eyes scanning every shelf as he navigated toward the soda section. Another sea of red caps, but again, no yellow. A sinking feeling settled in his gut. But he wasn't ready to quit. He dug deeper into the rows, pushing aside bottle after bottle, frustration mounting. Then finally he spotted it. One yellow cap, almost hidden behind the others. Without hesitation, John grabbed the bottle, holding it firmly in his hands. To his surprise, there was no flashy announcement on the packaging, just the familiar Coca-Cola logo. Still puzzled, he decided to ask the store manager. Walking up to the counter, he asked, "Hey, what's with the yellow Coke cap?" The manager smiled knowingly. His expression almost amused by the question. "Ah, that's for Passover," he said, crossing his arms. "Those yellow cap bottles are special. They're kosher, and they're made differently this time of year." John blinked, still holding the bottle in his hand. Passover? He wasn't entirely sure what that had to do with Coca-Cola. "Differently how?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. The manager explained. "During Passover, observant Jewish people avoid products made with chametz, which includes leavened grains and anything that can rise, like flour or corn. For Coca-Cola, that means switching out the high fructose corn syrup used in regular Coke with cane sugar, which makes it kosher for Passover. The yellow cap is how they let people know it's different. If you spot a Coke with a yellow cap, this is what means." John nodded, and the pieces started to come together in his mind. He hadn't known any of this. But as the manager's words sank in, he began to understand why Mark might have cared so much. He thought back to a conversation they had a while ago when they had been grabbing lunch. Mark had casually mentioned growing up in a household that held onto certain traditions pretty tightly. John hadn't pressed for details, but he recalled Mark getting quiet when he talked about his grandmother. Every year, she'd host a huge Seder, insisting that everything be kosher for Passover. Mark's job as a kid was always to make sure the family stocked up on kosher products, especially Coca-Cola with the yellow cap. "It's not a real Seder without it," she'd tell him, laughing as she handed him the shopping list. John smiled at the memory. That was probably why Mark was so persistent. When John finally handed Mark the yellow-capped Coke, he expected a quick thank you. But what he got was something more. Mark stared at the bottle in his hand for a long moment before looking up at John. "You have no idea what this means to me," he said quietly. John raised an eyebrow. "It's just Coke, right?" "No," Mark said, his voice lower, more reflective. "It's not just Coke. My grandmother used to have this thing. She'd always make sure we had something special. Something just for the family. Every year it would be different. One year it was these special chocolates from a local shop. Another year it was a certain kind of tea. But for some reason this Coke with the yellow cap stuck." John raised an eyebrow, listening. "I guess it's because it wasn't flashy," Mark continued. "It was just simple. But it was ours, you know? Every time I see this bottle, I think of those quiet moments, sitting around the table, talking, laughing. It's strange how something so small can hold so many memories." Mark looked up at John, his eyes soft with nostalgia. "It's silly, but every time I see this, it makes me feel like I'm home again." John felt a wave of understanding wash over him. This wasn't about Coke. It was about family, memory, and honoring those who came before. But John felt like there was more to the story, so as he left Mark, who kept thanking him for the Coke, he decided to dig deeper into what made this Coke so special. Back home, John settled in at his desk, his curiosity fully ignited. He opened his laptop, typed Coca-Cola Passover yellow cap into the search bar, and hit enter. A flood of articles and forums popped up, and soon enough, he found himself deep in a rabbit hole of information. Passover, as he quickly learned, wasn't just any holiday. It was one of the most significant observances in Jewish culture, a time when families came together to remember the exodus from Egypt. But what caught John's attention were the dietary laws. He had known about kosher food in a general sense, but Passover, as it turned out, was stricter than year-round kosher rules. Foods with chametz, that is, leavened grains that rise during cooking, were strictly forbidden during Passover. This included most breads, cakes, and even certain grains and flour. But the list didn't stop there. Anything that could be cross-contaminated or processed with chametz was also off-limits. And then there was kitniot, another category of food that many Jews avoided during Passover. This included legumes, rice, and corn. John's eyes widened as he read further. Corn, that was it. Corn syrup is a staple ingredient in regular Coca-Cola. It is the main sweetener in most sodas, including Coca-Cola, and that made it off-limits during Passover. This was why Coca-Cola had to tweak its recipe and create a special recipe using cane sugar instead. That is what a Coke with a yellow cap means, one made with cane sugar as its sweetener instead of corn syrup. The more John read, the more fascinated he became by how meticulous the process was. Coca-Cola had to be certified by a rabbi, ensuring every step of production adhered to the strict dietary requirements of Passover. The hechsher symbol on the label, a small p marking it kosher for Passover, was the final seal of approval. Yet the story didn't stop there. John stumbled upon something that took him by surprise: the taste. People who bought the yellow-capped Coca-Cola swore it tasted better than the regular version. This sugar-based Coke, often compared to the Mexican Coke sold in glass bottles, was hailed as a premium version of the drink. Some even stocked up on the yellow cap bottles before Passover ended, knowing it would disappear until next spring. Intrigued by the taste comparisons, John decided to do his own experiment. He poured himself 2 glasses, one from the yellow-capped bottle and one from his usual red-capped Coke. Taking a sip of each, he could immediately tell the difference. The yellow-capped Coke had a richer, smoother flavor, free from the syrupy sweetness of the corn syrup version. It was like stepping into a time machine and tasting the Coca-Cola of decades past. But John wasn't the only one fascinated by this seasonal offering. As he read more, he discovered that people from all walks of life sought out the yellow cap bottles. Some were Jewish, of course, keeping kosher for Passover, but others just loved the nostalgia of a sugar-sweetened Coke. The limited time availability made it even more desirable, with some enthusiasts hoarding bottles as if they were rare collectibles. A twist in the story came when John learned that the yellow cap bottles weren't just a quirky tradition. They represented something larger, an intersection of cultural, religious, and corporate interests. Coca-Cola, a global brand, had managed to create a product that served a niche community's needs while simultaneously appealing to a broader audience. It was a testament to the brand's adaptability and understanding of its diverse customer base. As John read through article after article, he found himself not just curious but surprisingly invested. He didn't grow up with any strong family traditions. Holidays came and went in his house without much fanfare. But the way people talked about Passover, how something as small as a bottle of Coke could become part of a larger tradition, fascinated him. It made him wonder about the traditions he might have missed or the ones he could still create. As the weeks went by and John continued his research, he discovered that other brands too altered their products for Passover. Lay's created special Passover chips, using palm oil instead of corn oil. Manischewitz, a well-known kosher brand, made Passover-friendly versions of everything from wine to matzo ball mix. Each product underwent the same rigorous certification process, ensuring it met the strict dietary guidelines of the holiday. But what fascinated John even more was how this trend extended far beyond Passover or kosher products. Globally, companies were starting to recognize the importance of adapting their products to fit the cultural needs of different communities. In the Middle East, for instance, major fast food chains have introduced halal options, ensuring their products adhere to Islamic dietary laws. In India, international brands modified their menus to accommodate vegetarianism, creating versions of their iconic products without meat. John realized that this wasn't just about increasing profits, it was about trust, about brands showing that they understood and respected the cultural values of their customers. Whether it was Coca-Cola's yellow-capped bottles for Passover or meatless burgers in India, companies were learning that respecting traditions wasn't just a marketing strategy. It was a way to build connections that transcended cultures and time. It made him think about how business, culture, and tradition had all become intertwined. Big corporations, in their own way, were now playing a role in helping preserve traditions, whether they intended to or not. Yet despite all this newfound knowledge, one question still nagged at John about the Coke bottle. Why the yellow cap? Coca-Cola could have chosen any color to signify the Passover version. Why yellow? He reached out to a spokesperson from Coca-Cola for answers. After a few emails back and forth, the reply came. The yellow cap was chosen because it stands out against our traditional red branding. We wanted to make it immediately recognizable for our customers who observe Passover. John found the answer satisfying but not as shocking as he'd hoped. Still, he appreciated its simplicity. Sometimes it was about making things easy for people, especially when it came to something as important as observing a holiday like Passover. As the season of Passover approached, John noticed the yellow cap bottles flying off the shelves more quickly than before. He chuckled, remembering his initial confusion about the cap. Now, as he stood in line to purchase a few bottles himself, he overheard a fellow customer ask the cashier, "What's the deal with the yellow Coke cap?" The cashier smiled and replied, "That's kosher for Passover Coke. It's got real sugar in it." The customer seemed intrigued, much like John had been weeks earlier. As he walked out of the store, John couldn't help but smile. He had unraveled the mystery, and now someone else would begin their own journey of discovery. In the end, the yellow cap wasn't just a simple marketing ploy. It represented a unique blend of tradition, culture, and modern business. Coca-Cola had managed to honor an ancient holiday while appealing to a modern market, and the yellow-capped Coke became a symbol of how even the simplest things, like a bottle of soda, could carry deep meaning. Would you have guessed what the yellow cap on a Coke bottle means? Have you tried this special version of Coca-Cola? Let us know in the comments below.